I never imagined that after all these years, after the garden beds and quiet cups of tea. Evelyn Hayes, the taller one, said, his voice like a cold wind across Arlington graves. She leaves with us. Now. Sheriff Marcus Thorne's face drained of color as the fingerprint scanner behind him blinked red and hissed out the words that had been sealed in silence for decades. Spectre 7. Classified override alert. No one had spoken that name in years, not out loud, not even in whispers. The message sent to Thorne was chillingly succinct. Do not interfere with the silent ghost. Widowed 82-year-old lady who brought over zucchini bread on Sundays and taught neighborhood kids how to prune tomatoes. I'd lived in Harmony Creek for 40 years, folding myself into its rhythms like a forgotten hymn. But beneath its skin, beneath the long sleeves hiding calloused arms, was someone else entirely. Someone the world once needed. And then discarded. Before they came for me, the day was ordinary, if anything in my life ever was. That morning, I had gone down to Johnson Elementary to leave a care package for the lunch staff, tiny jars of pickled okra and a thank you note. As I stepped out into the parking lot, I saw it, a transaction. Too clean to be innocent, too public to be proper. 5 men, a black SUV, and a box that glinted faintly in the Texas sun. I didn't speak. I didn't even flinch. But one of them saw me. That's all it took. Within hours, Sheriff Thorne had me in handcuffs, muttering charges about obstruction, while his deputy, a boy young enough to be my grandson, looked on with visible discomfort. I hadn't resisted, not because I was afraid, but because I knew the game. I had taught it once, long ago. They brought me to the station. They thought they were in control. And then my fingerprint hit that scanner. That silent scream of the past tore through every protocol wall the government had ever built. The agents came. Thorne crumbled. And I remembered. It's strange how memory waits patiently, like an old dog on the porch, ready to stir at a familiar whistle. Sitting in that cold interrogation room. I wasn't 82 anymore. I was 26, crouching in sand outside Kandahar, whispering in Morse under a half-moon sky. I was 39. People often ask why someone like me would choose silence, why I'd let my legend grow moss in the shadows. The truth is, because legends are heavy, and silence, in some strange way, sets you free. Still, some wounds do not fade. Sheriff Marcus Thorne wasn't just corrupt. He was personal. His father, now dead, disgraced, once tried to run an opium route through Kandahar disguised as military cargo. I exposed it. His dishonorable discharge made headlines. Marcus had waited, stewed in that bitterness, until the perfect storm arrived. An old woman near the wrong corner of town, watching something she shouldn't. He thought he could make me vanish. What he didn't count on was that I'd been invisible on my own terms for decades. You don't erase a ghost. When the agents removed my handcuffs and escorted me past the stun station staff, I caught a glimpse of Lena Kim, the young dispatch coordinator with glasses too large for her small face, watching from behind the desk. Our eyes met for only a moment, but it was enough. His first article, Who is Spectre 7, nearly broke the internet. It didn't tell everything, just enough to shift the tide. They became my unlikely allies, my strange, young shadows. But in that moment, in that room, I was alone, and I was furious. Not at them, at myself, for thinking I could hide forever. The agents drove me home. I asked them nothing. They spoke even less. As I stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk, the sun dipped low behind the pine trees, casting long, sharp shadows across my porch. It was time to unbury a legacy, not because I wanted to. Caldwell. There's a peculiar ache in being forgotten by the world, a slow erosion, like river water wearing down stone. After the agents left, my house returned to its silence. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, as if nothing had happened. The old oak tree in the yard cast long shadows that touched my boots. To my neighbors, I was still just Miss Eve, the old widow who composted religiously and refused to buy tomatoes in the winter. None of them knew who I had been, and if Sheriff Thorne had gotten his way, none of them ever would. Harmony Creek had always had a way of making me feel invisible. It wasn't unkind, just blind. People looked through you after a certain age, especially if you didn't fit their picture of what a woman should be. Black, alone, quiet. Every Sunday service, the church greeter skipped over me, not maliciously, just habitually. Every potluck, they asked who I came with. Every town hall, they thanked veterans, but never looked in my direction. It used to sting. Now, it simply confirmed what I already knew. I had become a ghost in more ways than one. But it wasn't just the town. Even the people who should have known better, the ones wearing badges and carrying guns, refused to see me for what I was. When Thorne threw the cuffs on me, it wasn't just to arrest a suspect. It was to erase me. To remind me that, in his world, I was a relic. An inconvenience. A scapegoat. He barked the charges with glee: obstruction of justice, tampering with an investigation, as if I were some nosy pensioner poking around in something I couldn't understand. I didn't say a word. Not when they shoved me in the cruiser. Not when they dragged me past the bullpen, past the glassy stares of officers who had once waved to me from patrol cars. It was Lena who saw. Or maybe she watched everything, logged every detail. When our eyes met through the station window, I knew she sensed something was wrong. And still, they held me. For hours. No phone call. No lawyer. He shut the door, locked it, and leaned forward until his breath fanned my face. "You should have stayed buried, Spectre," he said, his voice low. "My father rotted because of you. And now, so will you." I had heard threats before. From arms dealers. From mercenaries. From politicians with too much to lose. But none of them ever made it personal. Thorne did. And that, more than the cuffs, more than the cold, made my blood burn. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," he said. I smiled. "You should be." That was the moment. The moment I stopped staying silent. The moment I looked into the eyes of a boy who had grown into a petty, dangerous man, and saw only a child still desperate to vindicate his father. "You think you're powerful?" I whispered. "You think holding me here erases what he did? Your daddy smuggled weapons through a war zone. He got men killed. You're just the shadow of that shame." His hand twitched. I thought, for a breath, he might strike me. But instead, he turned and left. And 5 minutes later, the scanner blinked red. The system still remembered me, even if the people didn't. That night. That wrote coded messages on rice paper and slid them into coat linings. Now, they trembled slightly as I poured tea. Not from fear. From resolve. I would not be erased. Not this time. I walked out onto the porch, the cool air brushing my cheeks, and for the first time in a long while, I spoke out loud to no one. "I'm still here." That night, I had the dream again. Someone is calling for help, their voice ragged with pain. I lift a man I barely knew, young, eyes wide, barely old enough to shave, and carry him through enemy fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing the curtains like ghost fingers. I'd slept with the window open again, always foolish in Texas spring, when the air turns quickly. But I needed that breeze. I needed something to remind me I was still alive. There's a particular kind of fear that comes not from danger, but from the idea that no one would care if you disappeared. That your voice, your truth, your pain, might never matter again. That's what I felt then. I'd survived wars, betrayals, and secret missions that would break men twice my size. But now, in my own country, I heard a voice from long ago, General Sterling's, deep and deliberate. The real mission always comes after you come home. I never understood what he meant until Harmony Creek. When dawn cracked over the tree lean, painting my kitchen gold, I dressed slowly, wrapping myself in layers like armor. I didn't know what would come next, but I could no longer ignore what had begun. I stepped outside, and the air shifted. By afternoon, my name had begun to leak out online. Ethan's article had gone live. I didn't have to read it. I lived it. But I heard the phones ring. I saw the unmarked cars pass by slower than usual. I felt the subtle tilt of the earth beneath me, the way you know a storm's coming by how the birds go quiet. Then, a knock at the door. I didn't answer right away. I simply stepped aside and let her in. In my living room, she opened her laptop and showed me what she'd found: paper trails, redacted files. A fingerprint match that triggered alerts from the Department of Defense. "You're not just anyone," she whispered. I looked at her, this girl who could have been my granddaughter, and saw myself in her gaze. The same fire. The same refusal to let things stay buried. "Neither are you," I said. As the sun fell, we sat together, two women from different wars, pouring through fragments of a forgotten life. I told her stories. She recorded them. She traced timelines. I filled in the silences. And then, at one point, she looked at me and said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. "They tried to erase you," she said, "but you left fingerprints on everything." That's when I felt it. That flicker. Not pride. Not hope. Something smaller. Dignity. The knowledge that I was still here, and that someone finally saw me. Not as a threat, not as a relic, but as a person. The fear that had lived in my chest began to shift, no longer an anchor, but a warning bell. I had something left to fight for. The next morning began with fog. It settled low along the streets of Harmony Creek, curling in the gutters like breath from some sleeping giant. From my porch, the trees looked like sketches, half-finished and trembling. It felt right, uncertain, veiled, like the truth I was chasing. I made a pot of coffee the old way, slow, over flame. Lena sat at the table, still in her hoodie, combing through printouts she'd made at the station. She looked too young to carry the weight of national secrets, but here she was, elbow-deep in things men twice her age wouldn't dare whisper. She slid a document toward me, a service log, heavily redacted, but I knew the shape of my own story, even in silhouette. This operation, she said quietly, Phoenix. I nodded. It wasn't supposed to exist, I said. We weren't supposed to come back. Lena looked up. But you did. Barely, I said. And not all of us. She let that linger a moment. What happened? She asked. That question. That eternal question. What happened? It was more than one night in Kabul. More than Caldwell's betrayal. It was decades of silence. Though old, didn't hesitate this time. I opened it. Among the folded fatigues and sealed documents was a journal, handwritten, coded. I'd once sworn I'd burn it before letting it fall into the wrong hands. But now, I handed it to Lena. Can you break it? I asked. She grinned softly. I can try. She didn't leave the house that day. She sat cross-legged on my living room floor, decoding symbols I had built from habits and scars. By dusk, she found the first key, a mention of Caldwell. Long before he became a general, before he turned traitor. Do you think he knew Thorne's father? She asked. I looked out the window. They were all connected, I said. This wasn't one man's corruption. It was a chain. Lena's expression tightened. Then we need to pull it. That evening, the air thickened with tension. My name was still trending. They couldn't ignore it anymore. At 9:17 p.m., my landline rang. I hadn't used that number in years. Only one person still knew it. Eve, said the voice on the line. Gravelly. Slow. Familiar. Sterling, I said. A pause. Then, they've started, haven't they? Yes. Another pause. Then it's time. I hadn't heard from him since the hearings. Since we both agreed to bury the operation for good. But even then, we knew that truth was never buried. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig. They're watching me, I said. I know. He replied. They'll come for the journal. Let them try, I said. And for the first time in years, I smiled not from politeness, but from purpose. Before we hung up, he said one more thing. And a signature that made my breath stop. Vance. Mayor Robert Vance. Public servant. Church deacon. Corrupt to the marrow. I sat with that knowledge like I would a live wire. Calm, but charged. Vance looked up from his desk. His smile curdled with confusion. Eve, he said. I shut the door behind me and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking behind me was louder than I expected. Mayor Vance straightened in his chair, trying to find the right mask to wear. Concern, confusion, charm, but I'd seen them all before. Men like him collected personas like cufflinks. Polished and ready for any occasion. Evelyn, he said, voice syrupy, this isn't how things are usually done. I stepped forward. And yet here we are. He gestured toward the visitor chair. I remained standing. He sighed, pulled his glasses off, and leaned back like a man pretending to relax while calculating his exits. What can I do for you? I replied. Record. Of what? You. Caldwell. Thorne's father. All of it. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think you have something that matters? I know I do. He reached for the journal. I placed my hand on top of it. Touch it, I said, and this entire building gets a copy in 5 minutes. That made him pause. You don't understand how deep this goes, he said, his voice lower now, clipped. You open this door and it doesn't close again. Good, I said. It never should have. His mask dropped then. Because quiet is not the same as peace. And I'm done keeping your secrets. The next 30 seconds stretched into something brittle and dangerous. Then, to my surprise, he leaned back again and smiled. You think the public cares? That Ethan Miller can save you with a few headlines? We own the news cycles. We flood the internet. We paint you however we want. Truth doesn't. He stood suddenly, slamming his hands on the desk. You're finished. No, I said calmly. You are. I turned and walked out, leaving the journal exactly where I'd placed it. I knew he'd read it. I knew it would undo him. Back outside, the wind had picked up again. The sky stretched wide above me, cloudless and merciless. I stood on the sidewalk a long moment. "He doesn't need one," I replied. "Yet." "Did you give him the journal?" "Only enough." "Then what now?" I looked out my window, where the streetlights buzzed like old secrets. You learn to sleep lightly when you've spent decades knowing silence never means safety. The truck came first, barreled into my front yard like a battering ram, missing the porch by inches. I didn't hesitate. I slipped through the back window, rolled under the porch, and emerged behind the shed. 3 of them were fanning out. I moved fast, low, silent. Years may have added creaks to my bones, but instincts? Those never age. The first went down easy, sleep dart to the neck. The second, I tripped into the trellis, used a spade as leverage. Third tried to shoot. He missed. I didn't. When the smoke cleared, my house was rubble, but I was still standing. Blood on my sleeve, dirt on my face. Alive. Barely, but alive. So what do we do? I looked at them, these 2, young and burning with purpose, and felt something ancient stir in me. We fight. I stood at the edge of the wreckage as the sky turned a paler blue. The kind that arrives before dawn knows if it wants to rise. My house, my quiet refuge of 40 years, was now a smoldering skeleton, beams cracked, photos turned to ash. They thought the walls and the tea and the neat little garden were the only things left of Evelyn Hayes. They forgot I'd lived many lives before that one, and I still had one left. By mid-morning, the story had already broken. Ethan's headline hit like thunder. Spectre 7 survives attack. Who wants Evelyn Hayes dead? The photo said more than the words could. Me, standing amid the ruins. Face streaked with ash, shoulders straight. No makeup. No hero pose. Just presence. It went viral in under an hour. Lena posted a thread detailing the timeline. Footage from a neighbor's Ring camera showed the truck speeding in. A blurry glimpse of men in tactical gear. No logos. No hesitation. No doubt, they were professionals. I buried friends whose names will never appear in history books. I looked directly at the cameras. But I will not be silent anymore. The reporters fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to listen. They tried to kill me not because of what I've done, but because of what I still know. Because I carry proof of corruption at the highest levels. Proof involving Mayor Robert Vance, Sheriff Marcus Thorne, and General Victor Caldwell. A murmur swept the crowd. I held up the only thing I'd salvaged from the wreckage, a half-burned page from the journal. This is just the beginning. The video spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, millions of views. People who hadn't known my name yesterday were now asking, who is Spectre 7? But more importantly, they were asking, what is Blackwood Syndicate? That night, I sat in what was left of my back garden, sipping coffee out of a tin mug. Lena brought me a blanket. Ethan paced, phone to ear, talking with his editor. We were no longer whispering in corners. We had stepped into the light, and the world, at last, was looking back. The next day, we got a call. Sarah Jones, detective, Harmony Creek PD. Young, sharp, disillusioned. I saw what Thorne did, she said over the phone, and I know it wasn't the first time. I want in. We met her at a cafe outside town. She looked tired, hollowed out in the way only people working under cowards can be. She passed Lena a flash drive. It's everything, she said. Are you ready for what comes next? She nodded. I've been ready for too long. That night, Lena cracked the last cipher in the journal. The final page revealed a string of coordinates, marked only by one word, Cobble. Underneath, a name, Benjamin Carter. Who is he? Ethan asked. I smiled, soft and sharp. Someone who knows where the bones are buried. The story had cracked open. The truth was out. The syndicate wasn't just real, it was rooted, rotting through law enforcement, politics, even defense contracts. But we weren't just survivors anymore. We were witnesses. And we were building something bigger than defense. We were building a reckoning. Bitter. Raw. Exposing. The morning after the press briefing, my name was everywhere. Talk shows. Podcasts. News tickers. Spectre 7. The legend. The ghost. The target. But as I sat there in Lena's borrowed flannel shirt, staring at a borrowed phone screen in a borrowed chair, I felt hollow. I thought, maybe the silence was easier. The world didn't just react. A woman with only ashes for a home? I had lived in the shadows for so long, the sunlight stung. I walked out to the edge of what used to be my garden. Just a patch of dirt now. The dreams came harder. I was back in Kabul, but this time I wasn't running. I was left behind. Voices on the comms cut out. Footsteps disappeared in dust, and I sat, rifle across my lap, knowing no one was coming. When I woke, I was on the floor. I must have rolled off the cot in my sleep. My shoulder ached. My heart ached more. The old fear crept in, the one that whispered, "You're not needed anymore. You're just what's left." Later that day, Lena found me sitting in the back, staring at a burned window frame. "You okay?" she asked. I almost said yes. Instead, "Finally," she said, "you matter to me." And something cracked. Not loud, not sharp, just a release. I looked at her. "You remind me of someone I used to be." "Someone fearless?" she asked. "No," I said. "Someone tired of pretending she didn't feel fear at all." That night, I found a notebook and wrote 3 things. I am not just what I've done. I am not the stories they tell. I am still here. It didn't solve anything, but it steadied something. The next day, Ethan got a call. "They're going after your records," he said, "trying to discredit your missions. There's talk of a psych eval leak. They're planning a campaign. Paint you as unstable." I nodded slowly. "Let them. You don't seem surprised." "I've seen it before," I said, "but I'm done hiding." It started with a podcast. A man with too many followers and too few facts. He called me a fabricated legend, claimed I was just a bored old woman seeking attention, propped up by a media-hungry journalist and a rebellious cop. By noon, the accusations had multiplied. "They say you forged the journal," Ethan said, scrolling through tweets that dripped with venom. "They say you're not even a real vet," Lena added, disgust curling in her voice. One comment hit me hardest. Why believe someone who's clearly just trying to relive her glory days? Funny, I never thought of them as glory. I sat in silence as my face flickered across a news panel. 4 experts dissecting my sanity, my timeline, my memory. They questioned my integrity as if it were a game show. I wanted to scream. The doubts. A woman named Clara from Arizona wrote, "My mother served, too. No one believed her when she spoke up about corruption. Evelyn, you're not alone." Another, from a man named Hugo. "If she's lying, why are they trying so hard to silence her?" But sandwiched between them were hundreds more calling me a liar, a relic, a crazy old widow who couldn't let go of war. They didn't know me, but they wanted to break me. And, if I'm honest, for a moment, I let them. I stayed in bed the next morning. Let the coffee go cold. "Legal notice," she muttered. "They're suing you." "For what?" "Defamation. Leaking classified materials. Endangering national security." I raised an eyebrow. That's rich, coming from them. She sat down, rubbing her temples. "They're trying to tie you to the blast at your house. Imply you staged it for attention." Lena clenched her fists. "This is war." "No," I said. "This is fear." "They're scared. They're all so fast," Ethan said, stepping in from the hallway. The mayor's office leaked internal files. Old ops reports. Redacted excerpts implying mental instability. "They're trying to ruin your credibility by any means." I laughed, not out of humor, out of clarity. "They're playing page 1 of the oldest playbook. If you can't kill the person, kill the version of them people trust." Silence settled. Lena asked, voice small, "Do we stop?" I looked at her, at Sarah, at Ethan. "No," I said. "We pivot." I stood slowly, stiffly, but with purpose. Let them talk. Let them accuse. Let them try to make the public choose between their comfort and the truth. But while they do that, I pulled out a second journal. This one's not burned. That night, we recorded everything. Ethan filmed me in one shot, no cuts, no edits. Just me in a quiet room, my voice low but unwavering. I didn't ask to be a symbol. I didn't ask to be Spectre 7 again. I asked to be left in peace. They refused. I held up the journal. "They say this is fake. Then prove me wrong. Don't discredit me, debunk me. Show me where the lies are." I looked straight into the lens. They fear the truth because it exposes the system. They attack me because they can't attack the facts. So I'll say it plainly. Pause. Veterans, survivors, whistleblowers, each adding their voices, their scars, their stories. We weren't a whisper anymore. We were a choir. And I was no longer just the ghost. I was the spark. When the tide shifts, it never announces itself with trumpets. It begins with a whisper, a hand on your shoulder, a stranger who says your name like it matters. For me, it was Sarah. Surveillance footage mysteriously corrupted. Reports filed at 11:59 p.m. on weekends. I looked at her, this young woman with eyes older than her years, and saw something familiar. A line crossed. A silent vow. Enough. You're not just helping me anymore, I said. You're risking everything. She nodded once. I've spent too long swallowing my voice. You showed me what it looks like to use it. Later that evening, Lena gathered us in Ethan's living room. The walls were covered with printouts, maps, timelines. Red thread. Pins. The whole cliché. But nothing about it felt like a movie. It felt like war. Real. Quiet. Necessary. Ethan poured coffee. We have 3 main leads. He kept the dead man's switch. Lena raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Proof. Photos. Audio. If I ever disappeared, he was supposed to release it all. And now, she asked. I paused. Now we need him alive. We planned for days. And during those days, something happened I hadn't expected. People started showing up. A girl named Maya, barely 19. Said she'd seen Blackwood agents pressuring her uncle, a local contractor, to stay silent about missing shipments. Leo, a tech kid who once hacked his school's Wi-Fi to avoid a math test, offered to scrub metadata and trace burner phones. Chloe, a student journalist, handed Ethan a list of officials with identical offshore accounts, all tied to the same 3 digits, 7-1C. Maya asked me quietly, were you ever scared? Back then? I thought about it. Then I answered. I still am. She looked surprised. But you don't act like it. I do, I said. Bravery isn't absence of fear. It's choosing to do the thing anyway, because not doing it would haunt you more. We sat in the quiet. The wind in the trees. The crackle of drywood. Laughter from Lena and Sarah nearby as they debated encryption keys. In that moment, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was no longer a weapon alone in the field. I was part of something larger, stronger, a living truth with a dozen faces. We weren't a task force. We were a family. The next morning, we launched the campaign. Not a press release. A people's dossier. Lena built a site. Ethan wrote the opening letter. Sarah verified every file. The youth crew spread it like wildfire, TikToks, tweets, DMs. We gave them a name. A group of whistleblowers offered pro bono legal counsel. They thought they could isolate me. Instead, they exposed themselves to a nation of witnesses. One message stood out. From a woman in Louisiana. My brother died in a mission they said never happened. Until I read your files, I thought I was going crazy. Thank you, Eve. You brought him back to me. I cried reading it. Not for myself, but for every name I remembered only by blood type, radio call, or the way they whispered goodbye. I had been alone for so long, but not anymore. They hit back harder than I expected. 3 days after the 7 Light project went live, Caldwell resurfaced. Not in person, of course. He hadn't been seen publicly in years, but through proxies. Statements, denials, talking heads. They called the files digitally manipulated. They said I was mentally fragile, that I had history of isolation, possibly delusion. One anchor on national television called me an emotionally unstable veteran chasing ghosts. I didn't flinch, but I did remember. Kandahar. Dust. A boy named Ellis who'd never see 19. Rewrite the truth in their own handwriting. Until someone burns the page. We knew it was coming. A final strike. Something loud. Public. Designed not just to silence me, but to humiliate me. And then it happened. A video. Grainy. Cropped. No context. Me. Years ago, screaming at a soldier, face twisted in rage, gun drawn. The clip was real, but the story wasn't. They didn't show the hostage I was protecting. The agent who had frozen under fire. The child caught in the crossfire. They made me look unhinged. Ethan watched it loop online. They're good. He muttered. Too good. No, I said. They're desperate. Lena paced. We need to respond. Fast. Clear it up. Sarah shook her head. No. We do better. We make them speak. And that's when the plan shifted. We weren't just defending. We were taking back the mic. I agreed to an interview. Live. Prime time. No script. No editing. Just me. My story. 1 hour to either fall apart or burn it all down. When the day came, I dressed slow. Black jacket. Simple earrings. No medals. Before I left, I stood at the mirror and looked myself in the eye. Be the storm, I whispered. The lights were hot on set. The host smiled a little too wide. Cameras framed me like a relic, fragile, poised, possibly combustible. Then the questions came. MS. Hayes, isn't it true you've suffered from post-combat trauma? Yes, I said calmly. Like many soldiers. That doesn't make me a liar. It makes me honest. You've accused multiple public officials of corruption without offering physical evidence. We've published over 80 documents, 2 hours of encrypted recordings, and flight logs. All verifiable. But your own past is exactly why I'm doing this. Because I know what systems look like when they rot from the inside. I didn't blink. I didn't soften. I told them about Operation Phoenix, about the weapons deals, the names, the dead. And then I looked into the camera and said the line I hadn't planned. Some people say I'm angry, that I should have stayed quiet, stayed small. But if I don't speak now, I'd betray every man and woman who never made it home. Silence. Then a clap. Just one. Then more. Backstage, Ethan exhaled. Lena cried. Sarah whispered, she just won. That night, something shifted. Online sentiment flipped. Veterans called in. Survivors posted their stories. Even the network released a statement. Our platform exists to elevate truth. We stand by Evelyn Hayes' right to be heard. But the real moment didn't come from the media. It came from an old man in a VA hospital in Ohio, who sent a message with shaky handwriting and a photo of a dusty field in 1983. We saw you pull 4 of us out that night. I remember. You were never the ghost. You were the light. I sat alone that night, staring at that photo. For young faces. All gone now. All except me. And I knew. We weren't finished. The battle wasn't just for justice. It was for memory. No knocks. No headlines blaring my name. For a moment, I thought maybe the world had simply moved on. Then I checked my messages. 43 voicemails. Hundreds of emails. Staring out at the pine trees swaying like they knew something I didn't. I had won. Or at least, I had survived. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied. Like a field after fire. Just a note from his office that he was taking medical leave. And Caldwell? Subpoenaed. 2 federal agencies launched simultaneous investigations. There were murmurs of sealed indictments. Whispers that he might flee. All of it, everything we'd fought for, was finally shifting. But no one asked what I'd lost. Not publicly. Not directly. But I knew. And I kept count. I was a face people whispered about. Some smiled. Others looked away. I'd lost sleep. Dreams came harder now. Faster. Sharper. Sometimes I'd wake up ready to run. Ready to fight. But there was no battlefield left. Just a borrowed bed in someone else's home. And then there were the messages. Hateful ones. Threats. A letter slipped under the cabin door in handwriting I recognized from another life. 5 words. You should have stayed dead. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid. The stars above looked exactly the same as they had when I was 19, lying on my back in basic training, wondering if I'd ever make it out. It hit me then, I had made it out. Over and over. But every escape comes with a price. I pulled out a photo Ethan had recovered from an archived military folder. Me and my original team. Laughing. Whole. 5 of them were gone now. Lena said, "It's everything," I replied. I drove out of Harmony Creek alone. No ceremony. Just breath. Just space. Just the road. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. But it stood at the edge of a forest that didn't ask me for credentials. The trees didn't care who I'd exposed. The wind didn't whisper rumors. Here, I was just Evelyn. No rank. No threat. No code name. Just a woman who had carried too much for too long. The owner was an old friend, Tobias Lee. He'd served back in '89, long before I knew his name. We crossed paths once, briefly. At a remote checkpoint in Bosnia. He remembered my voice. I remembered his hands, how steady they were on broken radios. Now, 30 years later, he opened the door without a single question. "You look hungry," he said. "Sit. I'll make tea." He never asked for the story. That's how I knew I was safe. The first week passed in silence. I watched the morning light change across the floorboards. I listened to birds I couldn't name. I wrote names in my notebook, names of those I'd lost, not in order of death, but in order of memory. On the 7th night, he joined me on the porch. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me and handed me a mug. I held it between both palms, letting the heat find my bones. Then I said, "I didn't save them all." "I know," he said. "I didn't save myself." He nodded. "But you didn't disappear either." That night, I slept without dreams. for the first time in months. The next morning, I found a shovel and went out behind the cabin where the soil was soft. I dug quietly, planted seeds from the old garden, tomatoes, squash, sunflowers. Not because I expected anything, but because I needed to remember that life grows when it's tended to. Even scorched soil has memory. Even I did. Later that week, I wrote a letter. I didn't send it. It was to myself, written like I was someone else entirely. A version of me untouched by war, by grief, by duty. I wrote, "You're not broken because you carry pain. You're still worthy, still real, still good." I folded it and left it in the drawer. Sometimes we need to say things, even if no one else hears them. Especially then. One morning, it wasn't a bark of defiance, or a scoff, or something forced for someone else's comfort. It was joy, light, quiet, whole. That same day, Tobias gave me a gift. A clay pot, cracked on one side. "I thought you might want to plant something," he said. I smiled. I already did. Still, I took it, placed it on the windowsill. Into it, I put the last seed from the jar Lena had handed me. Like me, every morning now starts the same. I boil water, pour it over the tea leaves slowly. Open the window, let the sun reach the kitchen tiles before I say a word. It's not ritual. It's rhythm. And after everything, rhythm feels like grace. The herb in the clay pot has grown, its tiny leaves brushing the window pane as if to greet the morning. I whisper to it sometimes. Not because I think it understands, but because speaking gently to anything, plant or person, makes me softer, too. I haven't returned to Harmony Creek. Not yet. But I did call Lena. She laughs when she says that. So do I. We talk once a week now. No case files. No danger. Just voices. And life. 2 weeks ago, I opened a letter from a woman in Michigan. Just a handwritten sign. "If you've seen something and you're scared to speak, come sit." At first, no one came. Then a teenage girl. Then a factory worker. Then an old woman with trembling hands who said she'd once been asked to lie on a form, just a small one, for a shipment she knew was going somewhere it shouldn't. I didn't ask for evidence. I just listened. Sometimes, that's the loudest kind of justice. Word spread. The table became a fixture. I started calling it the Circle. No membership. No agenda. Just space. One afternoon, Maya arrived. She brought Leo and Chloe. They'd driven hours. "Just checking on the ghost," Maya said, hugging me without hesitation. They were taller now, more certain, less fire in their fists, more steadiness in their feet. They told me they'd started a chapter of the Seven Light Project at their campus. Over a dozen people had already shared stories, some involving school officials. Some family, some government. Chloe added, "They're scared, Eve. But they came because you did first." That night, I stood in my kitchen long after the sun had set. But if my voice helps someone else find theirs, if my wounds make room for another person's healing, then I'll keep speaking. Quietly, but clearly. I don't wear the name Spectre 7 anymore. Same gas station with the flickering O and open. Same bakery with the peach pies that always sold out too early. The same cracked sidewalk that used to trip me every Tuesday on the way to the post office. But I had changed, and that was enough. I parked a few streets over, near the church I used to avoid. It had a new coat of paint now. New banner, new pastor. But still, I remembered the pew where no one ever sat next to me. The potluck table that always ran out by the time I reached it. It used to ache. Now it was just a building. Next, I walked to what used to be my home. The lot was still empty, no house rebuilt. Just soil flattened and yellowed in patches where fire met grass. But in one corner, by the stone path I laid 20 years ago, someone had placed a bench. Carved into it were 3 words. She told the truth. I sat on it, ran my fingers over the letters. Lena, I thought. Or maybe Ethan. Or maybe someone else I'll never meet. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and let the breeze pass through me, the way it used to move through the porch screens, soft and unnoticed. From there, I walked to the sheriff's office. New name on the door now. No Thorn. Inside, a young deputy looked up. Recognition flickered. Then respect. "Miss Hayes," he said, standing quickly. "No need." I smiled. "Just passing through." He nodded. "No one ever cleared your desk," he said gently. "There's something here." He handed me a box. Plain cardboard. My name scrawled in Sharpie across the side. I took it without opening it. Sometimes the past deserves privacy, even from you. As I turned to leave, he said, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, for giving this place a second chance. I paused at the door. Not just this place, I said. I saved the last stop for evening. City Hall. The hallway lights were dimmer than I remembered. The portraits of past mayors lined the walls like reminders of what had been tolerated too long. At the end of the corridor was the mayor's office. Empty now. No Vance. No staff. But I stepped inside anyway. Same leather chairs. Same window overlooking the square. I stood in the center of the room. I'm not here to gloat, I whispered. I wasn't. I was there to reclaim my breath, to exhale the last pieces of a name that had haunted me longer than any mission ever had. Then I walked out. Not faster, not slower, just steady. I ended the day at the community garden Ethan built where my house used to be. Tomatoes climbing wire. Children laughing as they filled watering cans too big for their hands. Lena spotted me first. She didn't run. She just walked over like she'd been waiting. Come see this, she said, tugging my hand. She led me to a row of herbs. This one came from your pot. She smiled. Remember the cracked one? I nodded, blinking back something warm behind my eyes. Then, a little girl, no older than 7, ran up. Are you the ghost lady? She asked. Lena gasped. Sadie. I laughed. A real one. Yes, I said. I guess I am. The girl grinned. Cool. My mom said you're why we get to grow stuff here now. I knelt beside her. And you? I said. Are why I keep going. She didn't understand. She didn't have to. She handed me a flower. Purple. Bright. Growing wild in the corner. I took it. And in that moment, sun setting, dirt under my nails, laughter in the distance, I felt something rare and holy. Closure. Not the kind that seals the past away. The kind that lets it breathe. Sansong Teep Tuc Voi Tang 15, Tang 16. Hope Bam Yuan Them Hoi Tuong Now Kok Veo Donai? Banda Noi. 15. ChatGPT de Noi. Dui De La Tang 15, 902. Noi Evelyn Chuyen Han Tring Cotton and Ton Suc Man Xe Hoi. The world showed up. One comment said, if Evelyn Hayes can speak, so can I. That's all I ever wanted. Not applause. Not vengeance. Just a ripple. A crack in the armor of fear. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something honest. I still sit by the window every morning. Still sip tea. Still water my herbs. But now, there are more letters on the table. Invitations. Not just to speak, but to listen. And I say yes when I can, because I believe this. One voice can echo, but many? Many can shake mountains. Some people think healing means forgetting. I don't. Healing, I've learned, is remembering with less weight. It's walking through the same door that once broke you and breathing anyway. I sit now most mornings by the clay pot on my windowsill, watching the herb reach toward light like it was born knowing where to go. There are still letters. Still calls. Still whispers from people finding their courage. But the volume no longer scares me, because I know what I stand on. My own bones. My own truth. I was asked recently, during a quiet interview for a local station, if I regretted any of it. The question lingered longer than it needed to. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to feel it fully. No, I said finally. I don't regret the path I walked. I only regret not walking it louder, sooner. I don't mean I wish I had shouted. I just wish I hadn't waited so long to stop asking permission to exist. So, no, I don't regret it. Not the fight. Not the fallout. Not the cost. Because I didn't just burn bridges. I built them. With letters. With silence. With the way people now say, because of you, I said something. That matters more than medals. More than vindication. That is legacy. One evening, Tobias and I sat outside, watching the sky change like an old photograph fading in reverse. He asked, do you ever wish it had all just stayed buried? I didn't answer right away. Then I looked at him. If I had, I said, I wouldn't have met them. Lena, Ethan, Maya, the hundreds of others who now believe their voices deserve air. He nodded. That was enough. After the files disappeared, after the system folded in on itself and called it normal. I know you thought you were weak for wanting rest, but you were never weak. You were tired. And tired isn't the same as finished. I remember the way you used to sit in your garden and pretend the tomatoes were enough. You whispered to the soil, hoping something would grow bigger than your fear. Well, something did. You grew. You cracked open. You let people in. Lena, with her notebooks and wide eyes. Ethan, always asking the right question. Sarah, Maya. That entire wave of truth seekers who never would have known how to begin unless you had been willing to begin again. You didn't save the world, Evelyn. Not just Spectre 7, but the echo you left in people's chests when you reminded them that survival isn't shameful. You weren't a mistake. You were the answer to a question this world didn't know how to ask yet. So the next time you stare into the mirror and see the lines across your face, don't flinch. Don't sigh. Those lines are not damage. They're testimony. I folded the letter carefully. Didn't seal it. Just slid it into the same cedar box that once held my service medals. Then I stood. I walked outside into the fading day and sat with my back against the garden fence, dirt under my nails, knees tucked up like a girl again. And for the first time since I was a child, I said thank you. To me. Not for being strong, but for not giving up the moment I had every reason to. And in that silence. This one was harder. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. It was addressed to the man I once hated more than any other. To the man who turned my silence into a prison. To the man whose fingerprints were on every closed file, every erased name. The one whose face haunted my sleep long after the wars had stopped. General Victor Caldwell. I didn't write it for him. I wrote it for me. I began with truth. You almost broke me, I wrote. You didn't use bullets. You didn't raise your voice. You weaponized doubt. You turned questions into threats. You turned facts into fog. And you convinced good men to bury what we all saw with our own eyes. You took the mission we bled for and turned it into a spreadsheet. You turned allies into pawns. You turned soldiers into assets. You called it strategy. You called it service. You called it peacekeeping. I called it betrayal. I wrote about the nights I couldn't breathe, how I woke up with hands trembling, voice hoarse from dreams I couldn't remember, how I stopped celebrating birthdays, how I deleted photos just to protect people you didn't even know existed. I told him about the silence that wasn't peace, the way it grew inside me like rot. I wrote. I prayed once, not for mercy, not for peace, for vengeance. And I was ashamed of that, because vengeance is heavy. It eats you. And you taught me how easy it is to carry something you think is armor until it starts pulling you under. I paused writing after that. Went to make tea. Stared at the pot on the sill, green, alive, reaching. Then I returned and wrote. I don't need you to be sorry. You wouldn't mean it. I survived you. I survived the operation you tried to bury. I survived the silence you fed me like medicine. I survived the whisper campaigns, the erasure, the defamation. You failed. You didn't take the soft way I still touch the soil. You didn't take the names I remember. You didn't take the children who now know my story. You didn't take the truth that grew back stronger every time you tried to poison it. You tried to kill the root. But I bloomed anyway. I ended it not with a curse, not with a plea, just a sentence. I release you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I signed it simply. Evelyn. Not Spectre. Not Ghost. Not Witness Protection Asset number 0471. Just Evelyn. Just me. Then I folded the letter. Walked outside. Lit a match. Held it beneath the page. Watched it blacken. Watched the flame dance across every syllable I once held clenched in my chest like shrapnel. Watched it curl. Watched it lift. No anger. No fear. No triumph. Just breath. I didn't say anything that morning. No speeches. No letters. No calls. No commentary. Just breath. I sat by the window, my hands wrapped around a warm mug, the ceramic smooth against my fingers. Outside, the fog rested low across the valley like a thick woolen quilt. Trees blurred into gentle outlines, distant and soft-edged. The world seemed to pause, not out of fear, but reverence. No one needed me to be anything today. Not a witness. Not a warrior. Not a symbol. I was simply present, and somehow that was enough. The quiet didn't unsettle me the way it once had. There was a time when silence made my bones hum with warning, when I listened for footsteps I couldn't name. But now, silence held me like an old friend. It had weight, but it was no longer heavy. I listened, not for answers, for the subtle rhythm of stillness. A sparrow landed on the railing, shaking dew from its wings. I watched it. Didn't move. It didn't fly away. Just sat with me. Two creatures breathing in the same soft hour. Wind touched the window pane, tapping gently, then slipping away. Inside, the old floorboards creaked as the cabin exhaled with the changing temperature. The kettle whistled once and fell quiet again. Everything existed in simple permission. I had spent most of my life proving I was strong, that I belonged, that I remembered, that I mattered. But that morning, nothing asked anything of me. The world gave back what it had taken for so long: space. By mid-morning, the fog began to lift. Light pooled on the hardwood floor like water searching for corners. It kissed the tip of my boot. They had become weathered stones in the path behind me. I had walked them, and now I stood beyond them, not untouched, but transformed. Outside, the trees swayed. Their branches moved not with drama but with grace, as if dancing not for show, but because they remembered how. I stepped onto the porch, wrapping myself in the old green cardigan Tobias had left on the hook. The fabric was soft from age. It smelled faintly of pine, smoke, and earth. The boards creaked. My joints complained. Still, I moved slowly, steadily. I sat in the old rocking chair, blanket across my lap, and watched the sunlight filter through shifting leaves. And I said nothing, because some truths are too wide for language. Some moments only exist when we stop trying to describe them. This was one of those moments. The wind touched my cheek. A child's laughter rang out somewhere in the distance, faint, then gone. Perhaps from the neighbor's land. Perhaps from memory. Did it matter? It was beautiful, either way. I took a slow sip of tea. It had cooled, but not entirely. Still warm enough to remind me I was alive. Still strong enough to ground me. I didn't write that day. Didn't check the news. Didn't read any letters. I let the world be without me for a while. And in doing so, I found myself again. Later, in the golden hour, when the sky wore its gentlest colors, I opened my notebook. No stories. No revelations. Just one sentence. I survived myself. It sat alone on the page. Undecorated. Undisturbed. That was all I needed. Not applause. Not confirmation. Not even acknowledgement. Just this quiet knowing carried in my chest like a steady flame. The truth didn't ask to be performed. It didn't demand witnesses. It simply existed. The same soil that had burned once and now bloomed again, quietly, as if healing was its native tongue. I traced the rim of the clay pot with one finger, feeling the crack that ran through it like a scar. Something inside had begun to flower. I didn't know the name. I didn't need to. Not everything needs a label to be real. Sometimes, things just are. Like breath. Like peace. Like a woman who no longer flinches at her own reflection. The moon rose. Not fast. Not ceremonious. Just steady. I didn't speak. Didn't narrate. Didn't explain. I let it rise. And I remained. Still, I knew it was time to say goodbye. Not to life, but to the story. To the telling. The retelling. The constant reaching backward to show others the road I walked. Because I had walked it. And that was enough. That morning, I stood by the window with tea in hand, watching dew cling to the edge of a dandelion outside. The world had changed. Not dramatically, but deeply. I didn't need to narrate anymore. The echoes of my voice had become seed. They had rooted, grown, bloomed in people I'd never meet, in places I'd never visit, through lives I would never lead. That was the gift. Ethan arrived just after noon. He didn't knock. He knew I'd be ready. Lena followed, carrying the small tripod and a folded backdrop. Maya brought the mic. Tobias stood quietly at the edge of the room, arms crossed, eyes soft. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. We'd done this before, but today it was different. This time, it was not a declaration. It was a blessing. We set up the camera in the field behind the cabin, where the grass reached my knees and the wind moved gently. The light was perfect, filtered gold through cotton clouds. I stood with nothing in my hands. No journal, no document, just breath. They nodded when everything was ready. I looked straight into the lens. I smiled. Then I placed my hand over my heart and said, "Thank you, to those who listened, to those who stayed, to those who held space while I spoke, and to those who said, 'Me too,' even in a whisper. You gave weight to my voice. You reminded me I was not shouting into a void. You made space for truth." I paused, letting silence fill the frame. "I don't know what comes next," I continued, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore. I used to fear beginnings. Now I welcome them like the first light through an open window. I've buried names. I've grown gardens. I've stood in fire and walked out breathing. Now I know they just need to end with honesty." I stepped back, let the wind fill the moment. Then I whispered, "If you've survived something that tried to end you, don't bury that story. Don't hoard it. Somebody, somewhere, is waiting to hear exactly what you're afraid to say. Say it anyway." I smiled again. Not the kind you practice for public life. The kind that happens when your body knows you're safe. When the war inside has gone quiet. We ended the recording. No retakes. No edits. Just truth, spoken once, fully. That evening, I stood in the same field, barefoot, toes pressed into damp earth. The grass brushed against my calves. I looked up at a sky wide enough to hold everything I'd been. I raised my arms, not in victory, not in farewell, but in surrender to peace. Then I said one last thing. To whoever is next. I'm not passing on pain. I'm passing the torch.